Sisay with the Light Captain have an average win rate of 22.40%. This is calculated by adding all of these win rates from Sisays that have entered into different tournaments and then calculating an average from all of these win rate entries. And to give you some perspective, this is Kinnan's win rate. This is the Gitrog monsters win rate from tournaments: Atraxas, Nivmisset, Tassigur, Tayem, Tivit, Yuriko, Magda, Nayela, Krik, Korvold, and I guess you get something of the picture. And among all of those decks that we've looked at, in Sisay's case, we have something about 447 unique cards. And we can look at individual win rate among those cards. So the goal is to try and figure out the best cards for Sisay, according to win rate statistics. This circle diagram showcases the inclusion rate of a specific card, so this Deflector Might gets a 57% inclusion rate. This value right here showcases the average win rate of all Sisay decks calculated together. And that win rate value showcases the calculation of all decks' average win rate that includes the Deflector Might. And you can see here that we have something of the, kind of the same as the average, but maybe lower. And with this, we could try to figure out what cards are good or bad. But it should absolutely be mentioned that we did have a really high amount of different unique cards among the 86 different decks. So there are gonna be decks that include like a really low number, like in this case Teferi Temporal Archmage has an inclusion rate of just 2 decks basically, 2.3%, so you can't say anything from that basically. And some of the reasons are actually quite simple, like this is a new card, so we haven't seen that many decks including it yet, so it could increase over time, we will see. It doesn't indicate that the card is bad or good, it just need more testing. But a thing with Sisay is that you get to play a lot of really weird things. You can build her quite differently. And a lot of people really are playing her differently. As I have a lot of cards that I just have one inclusion, so to say, in this statistics calculation. I am actually a little bit surprised that this isn't seeing more play. I actually think this is one of the best stacks cards in the game. Or not the best stacks card in the game currently, but one of the better legendary creature stacks cards Sisay could play. It affects a lot of different decks, and I really like it. Really low CMC cost, only 2 mana, so she comes into play early in the game. That is quite key. I've always felt that Talia does something in close to every single game. Emil the Blessed doesn't have a 100% inclusion rate. I'm not surprised about that, but here you go. It has something of a better win rate compared to the average, so it's looking like a card that is recommended. Same thing with Derevi, heavily played, but not entirely 100%, but still a better average win rate compared to the normal average. This Blazer Kitten has something of a 20% inclusion rate, but it doesn't really affect the win rate for Sisay. I personally really like Ertai Resurrected. I think he's a great card for Sisay. Now finally, I have some statistics saying, yeah, he seems to be doing good. He has something of the 50-50 split almost in inclusion rate, and a win rate that is quite positive. This is actually surprising me quite a lot though. I don't like this card, but we're not looking at my personal opinions. Okay, I am kinda putting my personal opinions in there a tiny bit, but still, looking at this card, you can see that, yeah, it has something of a 25% inclusion rate and an average win rate that is better than the total average for Sisay, so it seems to be a card to consider. Gilded Drake is getting something of the same average win rate compared to the normal average for Sisay. This does not surprise me. So Force of Negation is usually getting a really good win rate result when I look at it on other commanders. However, when I look at it here, first of all, we have a really low inclusion rate of only 14%. 12 decks total have actually included this, so it's not that big. But I've always felt that I don't really have the hand size and the blue card ratio to support that card. It's usually sitting like a 3 mana cost counterspell, so to say. So I can absolutely see a reason why it's getting a low inclusion rate to begin with. Esper Sentinel is performing good, it's always been performing good. Jewel Lotus is performing quite good too, it has an 70% inclusion rate and a really good average win rate. And I mean, CC is very commander focused, so I can see the appeal of having this card inside the deck. You wanna get her out. That's quite key. Invasion of Ikoria is a really good tutor. This is so weird, one deck actually included Grafdigger's Cage. So this is a stacks card that really destroys Sisay, or well, not entirely. It's only affecting creatures. So you can find planeswalkers and lands and enchantments and things like that. So I'm just guessing that the one deck that actually did include Grafdigger's Cage is more of a heavy planeswalker deck. And by the way, I have a lot of very unique different planeswalkers, so yeah, I'm guessing that's what's the case. I'm not recommending it though. Don't play Grafdigger's Cage in your Sisay build. And don't play weird legendary creatures just because you can either. Giganta is actually showcasing a good result. So you have 19 decks that did include Giganta, and among those 19 decks you get an average win rate of 28.72. That is a good result. Kinnan is heavily played. Yeah, I think Kinnan is close to an auto-include in my opinion. It's always felt great. So the average win rate here is not what you should look at. You should look at how many decks are playing it, because the inclusion rate is saying something about what people think about the card. And when everyone is including it, it's basically getting a very close win rate compared to the total average. If we make a fast glance at the top 10 best stacks cards in a quickie look, these are the top 10 best win rate stacks cards for Sisay. And these are the top 10 best ramp cards for Sisay. I would like to point out that Bloom Tender and Fabro Elder are one card combos for Sisay. Well, they demand a tiny bit of color setup, but when they start to perform like all 5 pips of mana, or usually 4, when you get 4 that's usually enough, they start to be able to win the game for you. And looking at Fabro Elder, yeah, that is a very good win rate. Esika, God of the Tree, I've always loved Esika, God of the Tree. She's felt perfect for Sisay, and here we go, a 25% inclusion rate and a 25% average win rate when you include her. Eladamri's Call, a 23.61% inclusion win rate, and a 50-50 split basically among the decks that actually play it. The reason I kinda personally like it is that Demonic Tutor is the best tutor in the format, but you're always going to search out a creature. And Demonic Tutor is sorceress speed. This is instant speed. So you can find your dockside in your opponent's last end step and then untap. So basically you get the mana spent onto Eladamri's Call back. So you have more mana on your turn that you're gonna win the game compared to if you're using a Demonic Tutor. Elish Norn haven't been heavily played at all apparently. I used to play her a tiny bit inside Sisay, but I've personally moved away from her. The big reason is Toxrill the Corrosive, in my opinion, is better, but I have also actually moved away from Toxrill too. I don't think this is a necessary stacks effect, and the win con presented with her isn't necessary either. I've never really liked Imperial Seal inside Sisay. I still play Imperial Seal personally because it's a good 1-mana tutor. However, you're always finding dockside with this, and your opponents know that, so they know you're gonna win on your next turn. So casting Imperial Seal makes everyone look at you and try to interact with you, and that's bad. And therefore I've personally felt that it's a card I don't like the flow what it's giving to me compared to a Vamp Tutor that gets the dockside before I draw it for the same turn. But still, it's just 1 black mana, so it feels good, but I kinda wanna cut it from my list. And as you can see here, it has something of the same average win rate compared to the total average, but a little bit lower. 2.2%, 2.20% lower. Some decks actually include Kenrith, don't do that, he doesn't really fit, you don't need Kenrith inside Sisay. There is a lot of decks that actually go for a form of planeswalker trick, so to say. So I've seen Kiora and other planeswalkers, as I've showcased, have entered into various lists. I don't personally like that, but as you can see here, she's doing something good, kinda. There are different planeswalker combos that could utilize this planeswalker with other cards basically together. So you create a chain of finding specific cards one by one, and eventually you have a loop where a few cards that Sisay have found one by one basically go infinite. Kiora, Master of Depths, don't play her. Really low inclusion rate. Look at the inclusion rate. People don't want to have her in the deck. Don't have her in your Sisay deck. Karn the Great Creator is a Null Rod or Stony Silence for your opponents, or Collector Roof for your opponents. I don't personally like it. I've cut it from my list. I thought it was a little bit too expensive, and I rarely tutored it into play. Sisay have been moving more and more away from the stacks game plan and more towards a turbo combo game plan. So I don't think it fits. And I do agree with the very low inclusion rate on this one. Don't play it. I've seen a lot of decks actually play this. This is a similar version to Ezeka, God of the Tree. And as you can see, it's doing a pretty good job. Lagrella the Magpie, in my opinion, is amazing, and more people should play it. I think that the very low inclusion rate is just that people haven't started to test it out enough. So the very low inclusion rate of only 8 decks including it is a little bit too low of a sample size to say that it's that the win rate that you're looking at is correct. So that value right there is not trustworthy, basically. Laviniasaurus Renegade have always felt amazing. I've pretty much auto-included it inside all of my Sisay builds, I think. I'm pretty sure it's in every single one of them. And it's always felt great. It's always having an impact, and people really hate it when it comes into play, usually. Lasav the Multifurious have a really low inclusion rate. Lofo Corrupted Sheriff. Now the inclusion rate here is about 60%. However, Sisay have been entering into tournaments before Lofo actually existed. So I think that the inclusion rate is going to go up over time. Personally, I've always felt that it's a great card. It's generating treasures for you, and that's kind of spot on what Sisay wants. She wants mana. She's very addicted to mana. Loran of the Third Path. Sisay activates, find her, destroy an Unwalled Breach in instant speed. That's always good. Someone is trying to win with a Fastest Oracle, you tap her, and boom, that opponent loses the game. So yeah, she's good. I like her. Should see more play. This should also see more play, in my opinion. A big reason why I don't think people play it is because they don't know about it. So when this creature comes into play, return all blue creatures your opponents control to their owner's hand. Your opponents can't play blue creature spells, which means they can't cast Thrasius, but more importantly, they can't cast Thassa's Oracle. That's good! Or well, it's a little bit limited. On the other hand, everyone is trying to cast a Thassa's Oracle. Not everyone, but a lot of people are trying to cast a Thassa's Oracle. Also Gilded Drake, Phantasmal Image, so there are other targets too, but the big one is Thassa's Oracle here. Mayhem Devil is getting a very low inclusion rate and a pretty low average win rate. And the big reason, I think, is that you don't need it anymore. It used to be something of a finisher. You generate infinite treasures with a dockside flicker infinite loop trick, and then you find the Mayhem Devil and sacrifice all your treasures and do infinite damage. Now, you have other ways to actually finish the game by flickering a creature infinitely, so you don't need this. And it's not a... It's a good stacks card, but it's not amazing. It's not good enough. Mount Doom has a 50-50 split, and this is basically the thing that is... or, well, there are lots of different things that can replace Mayhem Devil, but this is a good finisher. So when you have Emil and Derevi and infinite mana, you can flicker Derevi infinitely and untap Mount Doom infinitely and deal infinite damage to all of your opponents. Easy. I've always been a little bit torn about including Mox Amber, actually. I don't think I actually play it currently in my list, but looking at it like here, it seems to be doing good. maybe I should actually start to include it again. The esteemed speaker. 18 or something of 19% inclusion rate, played by 16 decks, and an average win rate almost 30%. The big reason you actually play it is because that when you cast a dockside, you get mana, you activate Sisay, you find the Nambi, and you return your dockside back to your hand. This is going to increase the amount of colors Sisay have, so she becomes bigger, you can recast dockside, and if dockside is generating enough treasures, it's becoming something of a ritual. I personally don't think it's good, but apparently it seems to be doing good, so maybe I'm wrong. I did actually auto-include it for a tiny bit. I thought it was amazing, but I did start to cut it because I personally didn't feel it was working well for me. But other decks might have a different opinion, and other decks seems to be doing good with it. Nigella doesn't seem to be doing good for Sisay. She looks like unnecessary, you could say, according to the statistics here at the very least. Very low inclusion rate, 15 decks included it, and it's an average win rate of 19. This makes me sad. Orochi Leaf Caller. I remember when I made the first Sisay deck tech video about Sisay Super Friends showcasing Orochi Leaf Caller as a one-card combo. The basic trick is that you find Gaia's Cradle with Sisay, tap the Cradle and generate a lot of green mana that you can convert into Sisay colored mana to activate Sisay by only tapping Gaia's Cradle, if you have enough creatures. You then find Darevi and untap the Cradle and then attack, and when you connect with creatures, you're getting extra Darevi triggers to untap the Cradle more, to generate more green mana that you can convert into colored mana, and boom, you can activate Sisay a lot and usually win the game. Well, there's a new card in town that is doing the exact same thing, but better, I guess. The first thing first is that this is a legendary, so Sisay can tutor for it, similar to if Sisay could tutor for Orochi Leaf Caller, which she can't because it's not a legendary, it's just a creature. Now this has a very, very low inclusion rate, but it's also a very new card, and therefore it can't gain a very high inclusion rate by just the fact that decks haven't had the chance yet to actually play with it. But from the 10% inclusion rate, the 9 decks that have included it, it is showcasing a potential. So I actually think that people are going to cut Orochi Leaf Caller altogether and start to just auto-include Agatha Salt's Cauldron instead. And I actually think that this might become an auto-include for Sisay, because you can do the exact same thing with Gaia's Cradle and this artifact. Selvala Heart of the Wilds is another Bloom Tender Fabro Elder variant. This is a legendary. It has a very high inclusion rate, not an auto-include, but it's showcasing a good reason to be an included card. It has a better average win rate compared to the total average for Sisay, so it is performing quite well. You should still play counter spells when you play Sisay, don't go full legendary tribal. Swan Song. I play Swan Song in close to every Sisay build I have. Yeah. And yeah, it's doing good. I do like this. Teferi Time Reveler has a 100% inclusion rate. Every single Sisay deck have actually included it, and I absolutely agree. This is one of the best cards for Sisay in my opinion. You have a Grand Abolisher that you can tutor for, but it can also return your dockside back to your hand, so you can recast dockside and generate more mana, or remove a stacks piece that's preventing you from winning the game, like a Grafdigger's Cage. So it is absolutely amazing. Some decks have actually included Fasa's Oracle. It has been working out maybe okay. I've always felt that Timeless Lotus is a little bit too expensive. 5 mana is quite a lot, so you're finding it when CC is like a 6-6 and you've already won the game when CC is a 6-6, or you usually start winning the game, which becomes a 4-4. However, it comes into play tapped, so that's another big reason to not play it. So the tiny inclusion rate is saying that the card is bad, in my opinion. Don't look at the win rate. One deck playing it is nothing. Look at the inclusion rate instead. Tyvar is a creature that can reanimate Dockside or Bloom Tender. and making Bloom Tender come into play from the grave and activate the same turn is quite good. I used to play Tymna inside my Sisay build, but then I felt I don't really need Tymna. She's a little bit too slow. Her card draw is okay, but it's not the best. And it's turn-based. You need trigger-based value engines. So I cut her. And as you can see, not that many decks are actually including it. Very low inclusion rate, can't say much about that, but the average win rate is showcasing something. I do like to see that some Sisay builds have actually tested Underworld Breach. I have had an idea myself similar to that, play something of a Grixis game plan with Sisay, and the win rate from, or the tiny sample size is showcasing a win rate that is similar to the average, so maybe something to test further. Like a 5-color Sisay Grixis build with some legendaries in there, but the main focus is Adnos, Fast and Breach. That should work out. But let's take a look at this deck list. To see an example of how, I think it was Malcolm. Yes, we're looking at this person's deck list, Malcolm. He's heavy on Planeswalkers, he's going for the Amenatu, the Nakubolas, the Dragon God, and I'm just gonna guess that the Oath of Teferi is in there too. Yes. Oath of Teferi has a very high inclusion rate, and an average win rate that is quite positive. I personally don't like this card. I showcase this when I showcase the Super Friends combo with Origin Leaf Caller, Amenatu, Nekobolas, and this thing, but this is, in my opinion, a dead card. Or it's good when you get a lot of Planeswalkers into play, but when you get a lot of Planeswalkers into play, it's usually because you're playing either a casual game or that you're just lacking win cons, or something strange have happened. But a 5-mana enchantment that usually does nothing is kinda bad. So I moved away from this combo completely, more towards Emil the Blessed instead. But in this build we're back to a little bit more old school Sisay with Oath of Teferi. We're obviously playing Dockside and we're also playing Emil the Blessed, so we're playing like both things basically. Sakashima the Imposter is actually quite interesting in Sisay. Very high inclusion rate and a pretty positive average win rate too. So the trick, or the beautiful trick, is that when a Dockside Extortionist is in play and the ETB trigger is on stack, you can activate Sisay if she's a 5/5 and find this guy to make him enter as a Dockside Extortionist, and boom, you have a Dockside Extortionist trigger on the stack above their Dockside Extortionist trigger, which means that you're gonna generate treasures and potentially win in instant speed before that opponent. Because if you generate 8 treasures, you can activate Sisay again, find Emil, flicker Sakashima, and boom, you have infinite mana by making this come into play as a Dockside over and over again. Pretty cool. Kroxa Titan's Death's Hunger is a finisher that you usually use once you have infinite mana with Emil, so you flicker Kroxa with Emil the Blessed infinitely and kill your opponents. You don't need to do that in this case because you already have Airtie Resurrected. It feels like this list has multiple versions of cards that are doing the same thing. For example, if you have Airtie Resurrected, you don't theoretically need Kroxa. Also, if you already have the Mount Doom, which I do think... No, he's not playing Mount Doom actually. Maybe Mount Doom didn't exist when this deck was brought to a tournament, because if I understand this guy correctly, he should be playing Mount Doom. But Kroxa in Sisay isn't terrible either, because when it comes into play, you force your opponents to basically discard a card, and then if your graveyard becomes a little bit too big, you can get this into play, and then you have a big Elder Giant that punches hard. So it's kinda cool. It's not a bad card. Extremely low inclusion rate, so we can't really say if the win rate here that you're looking at is correct. So my personal take is that it's a card you don't need, but it's a card that isn't bad. But I think there are better cards than this in the end. But it's never a card I would be skeptic about if someone actually played inside their Sisay build. Let's look at how Ian, Comedian, have actually built Sisay. I'm guessing it's similar. Yes, it is the same Planeswalker stuff. Uku, Thief of Crowns is here too. Shali is in here too as well. She can actually make a copy of the Dockside and climb the ladder even more. And he's also obviously playing Oath of Teferi. So he's also going for that Sisay Planeswalker build. I actually like Roko inside Sisay. It's not something you tutor for. It's something you cast from your hand x equals 2 to find Dockside. And when you get Dockside, Sisay and this only will make Sisay into a 5/5. So if Dockside is generating 8 treasures, you can instantly activate Sisay, find Emil, activate and flicker Dockside only from this legendary creature and Sisay. Here we have another build from Bearded Hulk. Here we're playing more legendaries actually. And we're also playing Cultist of the Absolute. It has a 50-50 split on the inclusion rate. Basically 50 decks did actually include it, and I have something of the same average win rate equal to the normal average of all Sisay builds together. I personally like it. So the trick is that you make Sisay really big with this thing and you find the Hada. With Cultist, Sisay is 5/5, so you can find this 4 CMC legendary Planeswalker, you minus her and generate a bunch of treasures, and then you can activate Sisay again to find Chromatic Array, and you basically untap. You activate Sisay again, you find Revi, you untap this thing, and then you can find other things basically to continue the dig depending on. But usually when you found the Revi, you can also attack to generate more Revi triggers. So you're gonna be able to untap this thing twice, which means you can find Emil the Blessed, and with the second untap on this thing, you can flicker the Revi, tap Chromatic Array, and boom, you have infinite mana and infinite CC activations. And all of that possible with a Cultist of the Absolute, basically. And here we have the Hada, and in artifacts we have the Chromatic Array, together with Selvala, Bloom Tender, Kitten, Sakashima to steal opponents' Docksides. We also play Thassa's Oracle, and because of that I'm just guessing Consult, yes, and Tainted Pack, there it is, didn't recognize the art. And Oath of Teferi, obviously, because we are also playing Nikobolas and Aminatu. I actually want to go back to this specific card and talk a little bit about why I personally abandoned the Planeswalker package. The Oath of Teferi, the Aminatu, and the Nikobolas. You see, this thing combos off perfectly with a Gaia's Cradle. However, to make it better and better, more secured, you need a higher creature ratio. Or well, the higher the creature ratio, the better. But it doesn't matter what kinds of creatures you have. Tokens, perfect. Stacks creatures, better. Value engine creatures, also good. So you just want to have a really high creature density inside your deck to make this artifact and Gaia's Cradle into a perfect, very efficient combo. And by including Planeswalkers, you're mixing it up and you're making it harder for this card to become a perfect combo piece together with Gaia's Cradle. The point I'm trying to make is that you have a lot of different ways you can build Sisay on. You can go for that very typical, little bit of an old school now, Super Friends, Oath of Teferi, Aminatu, Nikobolas pathway with other possible Planeswalkers too. Or a more heavy creature build where you have creatures that have stacks effects that are locking down your opponents and making it hard for your opponents to play, and then once you have the critical mass, you find this artifact and then you activate CC again, find Cradle, and then you possibly just win. In other words, the game plan you could gain from having that high creature density ratio is that you're playing a control stacks game plan, putting hate bears into play that is boosting Sisay's power and toughness because they are also legendary, and then once you feel like, yeah, I've assembled enough, let's go for it. Find this in your last opponent's end step, and on your turn, Cradle, and then you win the game. I hope this video have given you some cool ideas and inspiration on how to build Sisay for you potentially. There's a lot of potential cards you could actually include, and a lot of different game plans you could actually go for. And obviously, as Wizards of the Coast are printing more and more legendary creatures, and with the power creep, Sisay will just grow and grow in power level over time by a natural progression of just printing more new, stronger power creep cards.